Hello, my name is Dante Renee, and welcome to the 10 Room Bizarro YouTube page, where I talk about films that I believe need to be talked about more. Like tonight's film, 1971's The Headless Eyes. 1971's The Headless Eyes. This is directed by the father of Jason and Justine Bateman. Yes, indeed. 1971's New York's The Headless Eyes. This particular Blu-ray is put out by Code Red, and I purchased this from their website. Diabolic DVD also had them. They're going in and out, so if you want it, you can get it. I just got this in the mail today. Just watched it for the first time ever. The Headless Eyes. It says in the front, "Before you dare to see this film, we warn you it's too horrifying for human eyes." Let's get into this movie right here. This reminded me in so many ways of the worlds colliding between William Lustig's Maniac, Paul Bartel's Private Parts, and Roger Watkins' Last House on Dead End Street, and maybe a bit of Abel Ferrara's Driller Killer. These worlds colliding and more. We have a rocking chair. The height and tallness of every structure around you in the city. An old woman on the street repeating the same line over and over again, telling you she knows the secret to something that you are interested in. But obviously, she's well beyond mental capacity. This is a experience, this movie. This is a bleak, oppressively beautiful, disturbing horror film of large, psychotic mental capacities. And this is a beautifully ugly snapshot of 70s New York City, and this is a real grindhouse, dirty, scummy, yet artistic feel, ahead of its time, because some of the movies that I mentioned, this one comes, before some of those, but that's a collide of those worlds. Let's get into The Headless Eyes. We have a man who's been severely impacted physically in his life, and from that one experience, it motivates the rest of his life, his goals, his artistic abilities, his creative abilities, and also his addictions and relationships. This is The Headless Eyes. First and foremost, we look at the music and the sound design for this film. The music and the sound design for this movie are... There's repetition, chaos, psychosis, ambient darkness, oppressive cacophony. What does anxiety sound like? What does mental instability sound like? What does psychosis sound like? In many regards, it reminded me at times of the way the sound design was done in Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Tobe Hooper's Eaten Alive. There is great repetition in this film and a variety of clashing instrumentation and sounds and bells and clashes. And as I said before, there is repetition in the score and repetition in the sound effects and dialogue at times. There's even an inner voice narrative at times in this film, at times. The sound of this film is the representation of the lead character's mind. Most definitely. When we look at the style for this film, this is a film that, yes, it's just scummy grindhouse, the real deal grindhouse, low budget, yet I thought they were beautiful, beautiful shots in this film. There's this amazing shot near the end of the film involving two cars, people getting into the cars and people driving, and just wonderfully edited and done. There are the editing of the film brings further oppression to the viewer. It's unending, it's relentless. This film is 80 minutes long and it never lets you go. And when the end of the movie happens, you have a pit in your stomach of the loss of what could have been, some things that were developing 15, 20 minutes before the climax of the film, some things that could have been, and a climax that'll punch you in your freaking face. 70s bleak, 70s unhappy, but done in a way that I've never seen done before, folks, because it leaves some threads bare, hanging in the story that further brings bleakness once you understand, once you've seen it. The cinematography in the film, there is this expert way in this movie of doing these extremely close shots. Whether it's in the murder sequences, the violence, whether it's in the architecture of New York City, people's faces, people's hands, of course, people's eyes, a meat locker, alleyways, steps on the side of a building, people's apartments in New York City, the George Washington Bridge and the lighthouse. It's bleak outside. It's not sunny. It's bleak. It always looks cloudy. And the cinematography, I thought, had beautiful closeness, beautiful, tight, close shots throughout the film that enhanced the psychosis. And it was beautifully shot, beautifully ugly. Very, very tight shots, tight, artistically done. The way the editing happens at times and the fades at certain points in the film and the shooting, it's chaos. It's oppressive to the viewer. Mixed with the sound design, the fact that this thing never lets up in 80 minutes, it's oppressive. And it will definitely spur on anxiety, nightmares. I would say that anybody who suffers from any type of mental problems or things like that, I mean, this is a film that could, really screw with your head, because it's one of those films that is up close and personal in the world of the killer, up close and personal with the lead person who has experienced a mental breakdown of sorts. There's some very interestingly weird dialogue in this film when it happens, but there are long stretches without dialogue in this film as well. Just that sound design and the character and the violence. There are interesting discussions, interestingly worded and written, involving relationships, involving the future, involving art, involving, intimacy, conversations between men and women in the film. There's a character in the film, this brunette girl that you meet at about the hour mark of the film, who really reminded me a lot of Anne Ryman's character, Cheryl Stratton, from 1972's Paul Bartel's Private Parts, which I reviewed on this YouTube page. Definitely look at that. She even sounded like her to me, and reminded me of her in the parallels with 1972's Private Parts by Paul Bartel, where we have an innocent girl who is going after a photographer who has a very disturbed life and mind, and So I saw some parallels with that most definitely. And this is a film that acts like a nightmare. It's one of those oppressive films, and the dirtiness of the vibe of the film really adds to the experience. In terms of the violence of this horror film, um, this is a film that is extremely violent in tone, in the strangulations, in the the destruction of the eyeball. Um, and it gets a bit disgustingly gory as well, but overall it's very, very violent in the way that people are destroyed in this movie, and in what the character says after he does it or while he's doing it. We have interesting sections of this film that play out like a newsreel, like a documentary. And as you know, some of the best, horror films of the 70s were definitely influenced or acted like documentaries. Um, and there's some very realistic kind of street footage in this film, street interviews in this film as well, which adds to just a weird vibe. And the film starts with close shots. As soon as you push play, you're in this world of chaos with the sound design and what is happening on the screen. Um, you will see behavior in here that is very, very disturbing. Um, and you will see changes in that behavior in regards to intimacy and relationships. I thought this was very ahead of its time, yet a connected angle with other films I believe Bloodbath, where we have an artist, where we have creativity, and the aspect of the artist and the artist's mind, and what spurs on art, and what spurs on creativity, and how artists, the struggles, the mental struggles of an artist, and the isolation of an artist, and the lack of regular perspective, normal perspective of the world and of themselves and of relationships of the artist. This is 1971's The Headless Eyes. This has a very sleazy feel to it, as some women undress, but there's no nudity in the film. But there's definitely a sleazy feel to it. There's a girl in the film that reminds me of the brunette from The Shining. And I am blanking on her name right now, but you know who I'm talking about. And also mixed with like an Andy Warhol vibe, you know. This is The Headless Eyes 1971, and this is the Code Red Blu-ray. And I believe, mostly available on VHS as well. Thank you so much for watching the 10 Room Bazaar YouTube page, where I talk about films that I believe need to be talked about more, like The Headless Eyes. Thank you, and good night.